"Choose your prize, woman," the sheriff said, and the crowd roared with laughter. But when the giant cowboy stepped forward and growled, "I'll take the black girl in chains," the street fell silent. Everyone thought they knew his intent. They didn't, because in the dust of that moment, chains were broken, and a secret deed to the town's water was revealed. Now one scarred cowboy stands against a crooked lawman, a mob hungry for land and the prejudice of a whole frontier town. The black woman, he claimed. She's not just fighting for her life. She's fighting for her freedom, her land, and the future of every child who dares to dream in that valley. But with jail keys clanging, hooves thundering at midnight, and the sheriff's fire set to burn everything she owns, will mercy and faith be enough to stop the town from chaining her again? Will justice die in the dust? Your reactions remind me why these stories matter. If you still believe in the quiet power of love, justice, and truth, then you're part of the reason I keep sharing them. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty town square, where a crowd had gathered like vultures around carrion. The wooden platform erected in front of the sheriff's office cast long shadows across weathered planks, and the sound of chains dragging against wood echoed through the oppressive air. Sheriff Dole stood tall, his badge gleaming as he gestured dramatically at the line of women. Their wrists and ankles bore heavy iron shackles that clinked with every movement. "Folks," he called out, his voice carrying across the square, "seems our town's got itself some new additions." Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Among the captured women stood Chris Johnson, her spine straight as a rail despite the weight of her chains. The cotton of her simple dress was stained with trail dust, but her eyes held a fire that the sheriff's mockery couldn't extinguish. She fixed her gaze on the distant mountains, refusing to acknowledge the jeers or the sheriff's satisfied smirk. "Now, then," Sheriff Dole drawled, pacing along the platform's edge, "as your duly elected lawman, I'm offering these unclaimed women for adoption into proper households." He paused for effect, savoring the crowd's anticipation. Any man of good standing can step forward and choose himself a prize woman to take home. More laughter erupted, darker this time. The townsfolk pressed closer, eager for the spectacle. Several men elbowed each other, pointing and whispering as they sized up the women like cattle at auction. "How about this one?" The sheriff grabbed Crease's chin, forcing her to face the crowd. "Picked her up with the wagon train raid. Claims she's got papers, says she's free." He released her with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Ain't that a thing?" Crease didn't flinch. She'd endured worse than his touch, worse than the crowd's contempt. Her late husband's river deed was sewn into the hem of her dress, and as long as she drew breath, she'd fight for that promise of a new life. The crowd's attention shifted suddenly as a tall figure emerged from the shadows of the mercantile. Boots striking wooden planks echoed across the square as Noel Boone approached. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone, whispers following in his wake. Noel's scarred face was unreadable, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his weathered hat. He moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to violence, though his hands hung loose and empty at his sides. The silver handle of his Colt revolver caught the sun as he stopped at the platform's edge. Sheriff Dole's smile faltered for just a moment before spreading wider, more forced. "Well, if it ain't Noel Boone himself, come down from his mountain." He swept his arm toward the line of women. "See something that catches your eye, Boone?" The crowd held its collective breath. Noel was known for his silence, for the mysterious past that had left him both scarred and dangerous. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried clearly across the square. "I'll take the black girl in chains." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some women covered their mouths in shock, while men muttered darkly among themselves. Sheriff Dole's eyes narrowed, but he couldn't refuse without losing face. Well now, the sheriff recovered quickly. Ain't you full of surprises? She's yours then, if you've got the adoption fee. Noel reached into his vest and produced several gold coins, dropping them one by one into the sheriff's outstretched hand. Each coin's impact seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Get her down here," Noel said simply. Two deputies rushed to unlock Crease's chains from the other women. She descended the steps with dignity, though her heart hammered in her chest. She heard whispers about Noel Boone, his solitary life, his deadly reputation. But something in the way he'd spoken, the quiet authority in his voice, made her wonder. Noel didn't speak again. He turned and began walking, clearly expecting Crease to follow. She did, her chains rattling with each step. A crowd's eyes followed them until they turned down a side street, heading toward the edge of town. The sun was setting by the time they reached the outskirts, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Noel led them to a small creek where cottonwood trees provided shelter from prying eyes. Only then did he stop and turn to face her. Crease stood her ground, chin raised, prepared for whatever might come. But Noel reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a key, the key to her shackles. Without a word, he knelt and began unlocking her chains. The iron fell away piece by piece, each clank against the ground a shock in the evening quiet. When the last shackle dropped, Crease rubbed her wrists, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Noel straightened, reached back into his saddlebag, and pulled out a canteen. "You're free," he said simply. Holding out the water, Gris stared at him, searching his scarred face for any sign of deception. Finding none, she accepted the canteen with trembling hands. "Why?" she whispered. Noel's eyes met hers directly for the first time. They were a startling blue, filled with something that might have been pain or memory or both. "No one deserves chains," he said quietly. Then he turned away, giving her privacy as she drank deeply from the canteen. The water was cool and clean, washing away the dust and fear of the day. When she lowered the canteen, Crease found her voice was steadier. "I have somewhere I need to go," she said. "My husband's river deed. Best wait till full dark," Noel interrupted, still not looking at her. "Sheriff's men will be watching the roads." He gestured to the cottonwood grove. "Rest here if you want. I'll keep watch." Crease studied his broad back, the set of his shoulders that spoke of capability and, perhaps, honor. The man was a mystery. Feared by the town, yet here he was, showing kindness when no one else would. She settled beneath one of the trees, her muscles finally relaxing as the chain's weight became memory. As darkness crept across the land, crickets began their evening song. Noel remained standing, a silent sentinel against the deepening purple of the sky. Crease watched him, wondering what had happened to leave such scars, both visible and hidden. But for now, she was content with the miracle of freedom, the weight of her husband's deed against her leg, and the unexpected discovery that even in the darkest moments, Grace could appear wearing the face of a stranger. The setting sun painted long shadows across the scrubland as Noel and Crease rested near his tethered horse. The bay stallion grazed contentedly on sparse grass, his reins dragging loosely in the dust. Crease sat with her back against a sun-warmed boulder, keeping a wary distance from her unexpected savior. Noel busied himself, gathering dry branches for a fire, movements precise and practiced. Though he hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since freeing her, Crease studied him carefully. His scarred face told stories of violence, yet his gentle handling of the horse and quiet demeanor suggested something deeper. "Why did you really help me?" Chris finally asked, her voice hoarse. From days without proper water, Noel paused in his work, straightening slowly. Saw what they had planned. He arranged the kindling with careful attention. "Sheriff's men, they ain't kind to women alone. And you are." Kreese couldn't keep the edge from her voice, though exhaustion made it waver. A ghost of a smile crossed Noel's face as he struck a match. "No intentions to ward you, ma'am. Just couldn't watch what was coming." The kindling caught, and he fed the small flame with larger sticks. "You're free to go wherever you please." Kreese wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the evening chill. "Settle in. I got nowhere safe to go," she admitted quietly. "Not yet, anyway." She hesitated, weighing her next words carefully. "Would you? Might I stay with you? Just until I get my strength back." Noel's hands stilled over the growing fire. He seemed to be wrestling with something internal, his jaw working silently. Finally, he gave a short nod. "Got a place up in the hills. Remote. You can rest there." Relief flooded through Kreese, though she kept her face neutral. "Much obliged," she said softly, as night drew its dark curtain across the sky. Stars began appearing one by one. Noel's fire cast a small circle of warmth, beyond which the desert night grew cold and vast. He pulled some hard trail bread from his saddlebags and offered her a share. Kreese accepted the bread gratefully. As she ate, memories of the past months pressed in like the surrounding darkness. "Had a husband," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Good man. William Johnson. We're heading west together. Had plans." Noel listened silently, his scarred face half illuminated by the firelight. "Fever took him 3 months back." Kreese swallowed hard. "But he left me something important." She reached into the hem of her dress and carefully withdrew a folded document. Worn soft at the creases from constant carrying, Noel accepted the paper when she held it out, moving closer to the fire to read. His eyes widened slightly as he studied the official text and seal. "This is a river deed," he said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "For water rights along the Sweetwater. William paid good money for it," Kreese said. "Said it was our future, more than that." Noel handed the deed back carefully, as if it might crumble. "That stretch of river. It's the only reliable water source for 50 miles in summer. Worth more than gold to ranchers hereabouts." Understanding dawned in Kreese's eyes. "That why the sheriff's men grabbed me?" They knew. Maybe. Noel poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks swirling upward. Or maybe they just saw a woman alone. Either way, you'll need to be careful now. They settled into silence as the night deepened. Noel took first watch while Kreese tried to sleep, wrapped in the blanket he'd offered. Despite her exhaustion, rest came fitfully. Every snapping twig or distant coyote call jerked her awake, heart pounding with memories of rough hands and rattling chains. Dawn came with pale fingers of light stretching across the eastern sky. They ate a cold breakfast of more trail bread. Then Noel saddled his horse. "It's a fair ride to my place," he said, adjusting the cinch. "You ever been on a horse before?" Some Kreese replied. "William taught me." Noel nodded and helped her mount behind him. The bay stallion shifted, adjusting to the double burden, then settled as Noel gathered the reins. They set out at an easy walk, following game trails that wound through scattered juniper and sage. The morning sun climbed higher as they rode, burning away the night's chill. Kreese found herself relaxing slightly, lulled by the horse's steady gait and the rhythm of hooves on packed earth. The land opened before them, rolling hills giving way to steeper terrain, with mountains blue and distant on the horizon. But peace was short-lived. Something made the horse's ears flick back, and Kreese felt Noel tense. She didn't see anything in the empty landscape, but years of survival had taught her to trust such warnings. "What is it?" she whispered. "Keep riding normal," Noel murmured. "Someone's watching from that bluff to the west." Kreese resisted the urge to turn and look. They maintained their unhurried pace, but she could feel Noel's alertness in every line of his body. Only when they'd ridden well past the bluff did he relaxed slightly. Neither of them saw Deputy Walt Briggs emerge from his hiding spot once they'd passed. He watched them a moment longer, then swung onto his own horse and turned back toward town, kicking up dust in his haste to report what he'd seen. The sun climbed higher as Noel and Kreese continued their journey into increasingly rough country, each lost in their own thoughts about what trouble might be riding hard toward town behind them. Dawn was breaking over the foothills when Noel's bay horse crested the final rise. Kreese, still mounted behind him, caught her first glimpse of his homestead, a weathered cabin nestled against the slope, surrounded by scattered pines and a small clearing. Morning mist clung to the ground, giving the scene an otherworldly quality. Noel reined the horse to a stop near a rough-hewn hitching post. "It ain't much," he said quietly, helping Kreese dismount. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she steadied herself against the post while Noel saw to his horse. The cabin was indeed humble, logs gone silver with age, a tin chimney that leaned slightly, and a small covered porch with a single chair. But to Kreese, after weeks of running, it looked like sanctuary. Noel shouldered open the creaking door and stepped aside to let her enter. The interior was spare, barely furnished. A narrow cot occupied one wall, its blanket pulled tight, with military precision. A rough table with two mismatched chairs stood beneath the room's single window. An iron cooking stove squatted in the corner, its pipe disappearing into the ceiling. "Been meaning to tidy up some," Noel said, suddenly self-conscious of the dust and cobwebs. Kreese set down her small bundle of possessions, the few things she'd managed to keep with her through everything. "It's shelter," she said simply, "and that's more than I had yesterday." While Noel went to fetch water and tend to outdoor chores, Kreese surveyed the cabin with a housekeeper's eye. She found a worn broom in the corner and began sweeping, starting in the furthest corner and working her way toward the door. Dust motes danced in the shafts of morning light. She worked steadily through the morning, finding satisfaction in each small improvement. She beat the dust from Noel's spare blanket, scrubbed the table's surface until the wood grains showed, and arranged her few belongings neatly on a shelf. When Noel returned with a bucket of fresh water, he paused in the doorway, taking in the transformation. The cabin seemed brighter somehow, as if Kreese's presence had awakened something long dormant. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, setting down the bucket. Kreese wiped her hands on her skirt. "Keeping busy helps me think, and—" she hesitated, "it helps make a place feel more like home." That evening, Kreese insisted on cooking, using the simple provisions Noel had on hand to make a basic stew. The familiar routine of chopping and stirring brought comfort, and soon savory smells filled the cabin. They ate at the freshly scrubbed table, the stew warm and filling. As darkness gathered outside, Kreese finally spoke of what had brought her here. "After William died," she began, stirring her stew absently, "seemed like every man with a horse and a gun got interested in our land. Some tried sweet talk first, offering to buy the deed for less than William paid. When I refused, she'd a steadying breath. One night, I woke to smoke. Someone had set fire to my cabin's back wall. If the rain hadn't come when it did—" Noel listened intently, his scarred face grave in the lamplight. "I ran that night," Kreese continued. "Been running ever since, until those men caught up to me near town." She looked up at Noel. "Why is this piece of land worth so much killing over?" Set down his spoon. "That stretch of river you own, it's the only reliable water for most ranchers' cattle during the dry months. Whoever controls it controls all the grazing for miles around. Men have died for less out here." They sat in silence for a moment, letting that truth settle between them. "Violence seems to follow some of us," Noel said finally, his voice rough. "Been trying to leave it behind myself. Used to ride with a rough crew, did things I ain't proud of. Thought living up here alone. might help me forget." He touched the scar on his face unconsciously. "But the past has a way of finding you." Meanwhile, in town, Sheriff Asa Dole sat at his desk, holding Crease's deed to the light. Deputy Walt Briggs stood before him, having just finished his report about seeing Crease and Noel riding into the hills together. "That no-good Boone," the sheriff spat, slapping the document down. "Should have run him out of the territory years ago when I had the chance." He stood, pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. "And now he's harboring our property." "Ain't exactly our property, Sheriff," Briggs ventured. "That deed looks legal enough." The sheriff rounded on him. "Everything in this territory is mine by right. I built this town, made it safe for decent folks. And now some colored girl thinks she can waltz in and take the best water rights in the county." He slammed his fist on the desk. "We're taking back what's mine." Back in the cabin, night had fully fallen. Noel had insisted Crease take the cot while he made do with blankets near the stove. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft popping of the fire's embers. Crease knelt by the hearth, the warmth washing over her. Softly, almost to herself, she began to sing a hymn her mother had taught her long ago. Her voice was clear and sweet, carrying years of faith and sorrow. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. On his makeshift bed, Noah lay still, eyes closed but very much awake. The simple melody filled the cabin, stirring memories he'd thought long buried. His mother singing as she worked. Sunday gatherings, a time before violence and solitude had claimed him. He remained silent, but a single tear tracked down his scarred cheek. Gleaming in the far-reach HT, dawn painted the hills in soft gold as Noel stirred from his makeshift bed by the stove. The cabin floor was hard, but he'd slept worse places. His joints crackled as he rose, pulling on his boots without making noise. Crease still slept on the cot, her breathing deep and peaceful. He stepped out into the crisp morning air, dew dampening. His boots, the day's chores, wouldn't wait. First came water, 2 buckets from the spring that bubbled up behind the cabin. The wooden yoke settled across his broad shoulders as he made the first of many trips. At the spring, he paused, splashing cold water on his face. The morning silence broke with the sound of the cabin door. Crease emerged, her hair wrapped neatly in a scarf, already looking more rested than yesterday. "Let me help with those," she said, reaching for one of the buckets. Noel shook his head. "You don't need to." "I won't sit idle while you work," Crease interrupted firmly. "These hands aren't afraid of labor." She lifted one bucket, matching his stride, back to the cabin. The morning unfolded in quiet industry, while Noel split logs at the chopping block. The steady thunk of his axe echoing through the trees. Crease moved between cabin and yard. She gathered eggs from the small hen house, surprised to find any chickens at all. Inside, she found flour and yeast in his meager stores and set about mixing bread dough. Noel paused in his work, watching as she carried water to his bay horse in the Liento shelter. The animal, usually wary of strangers, accepted her gentle touch. She spoke soft words to the horse while checking its hooves for stones, clearly no stranger to caring for animals. When Crease returned to the cabin, she noticed Noel's spare shirt hanging on a peg, torn at the shoulder. Without comment, she found needle and thread in her bundle and set to mending it. Her stitches neat and even. The morning passed in this way, each focused on their tasks but aware of the other's presence. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by necessary words about work or meals. By midday, fresh bread was rising near the stove, and a neat stack of split wood stood by the cabin wall. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke their routine. Noel tensed, hand moving toward the rifle propped by the door. But the rider who appeared was an elderly man on a gentle dun horse wearing a threadbare black coat, Preacher Josiah Ward, who served the scattered homesteads in these hills. Afternoon, Noel, the preacher called, dismounting stiffly. His eyes fell on Chris, who had stepped onto the porch. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "What brings you up this way, preacher?" Noel asked, though his tone was friendly enough. Josiah's weathered face grew serious. "Trouble brewing in town, I'm afraid. Sheriff Dahl's been talking, spreading poison." He glanced at Chris. "Says you stole this lady, Noel. Claims you mean to breed trouble in the territory." Chris's spine straightened, dignity rising in her bearing. "He's the one who had me in chains," she said quietly. "Mr. Boone showed me kindness when others showed only cruelty." The preacher nodded slowly. "I believe you, child. But Dole has a way of turning men's hearts with fear and lies. Some are already talking about riding up here to set things right." He turned to Noel. "Might be wise to leave for a spell, let things cool down." "No." Chris's voice was firm. She pulled the folded deed from her pocket, holding it out to Josiah. "My husband died protecting this land. He believed in building something here, a place where all God's children might live free. I won't run from men whose hearts are poisoned by greed." Josiah studied the document, then Chris's face. "You have courage, daughter, but courage alone won't stop bullets." "She's right," Noel said quietly. All eyes turned to him. "Running just gives men like Dole more power. Sometimes you have to stand." The preacher sighed, but there was respect in his tired eyes. "Then I'll pray for you both, and I'll do what I can to speak truth in town." He mounted his horse with effort. "God watch over this place." They watched him ride away, his black coat fading into the afternoon shadows. Chris returned to the cabin, checking her rising bread. The warm, yeasty smell filled the small space. Noel remained on the porch, thinking about courage. He'd known brave men before had ridden with some, fought others. But Chris's quiet strength was different. It came from something deeper than pride or anger. It came from faith, in God, in justice, in the promise of that little piece of riverland. When evening came, Chris set their simple supper on the freshly scrubbed table: beans, cornbread, and the last of the morning's eggs. Steam rose from their tin cups of coffee. Before eating, Noel surprised himself by bowing his head. "Lord," he said roughly, the words strange in his mouth after so many years, "thank you for this food." And he paused, feeling Chris's presence across the table, for bringing light back to this cabin. Miles away, in the crowded saloon, Sheriff Asa Dole held court. Ranchers and cowboys filled the smoky room, their faces red with whiskey and anger. "That river water belongs to honest men," Dole proclaimed, pacing between the tables. "Not some uppity-colored woman and her outlaw protector." He slapped a hand on the bar. "You all know what summer drought does to cattle. Without access to that river, your herds will suffer. Your families will suffer." Mutters of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Help me set this right," the sheriff continued, "and I'll make sure you all get fair water rights. That's a promise from a man who built this territory." He raised his glass. "What do you say, boys? Ready to restore proper order?" The answering cheer shook the saloon's windows. Dole smiled, but his eyes remained cold as he watched his willing army take shape. By tomorrow, he thought, that deed would be his. One way or another, dawn spread its pale fingers across the horizon as Noel saddled his bay horse. The morning air held a bite, promising another scorching afternoon. Chris emerged from the cabin, wearing her freshly pressed dress, her head wrapped in a clean scarf. "You sure about this?" Noel asked, adjusting the cinch. "I can fetch supplies alone." "I won't hide," Chris replied, her voice steady. "Fear is what men like Sheriff Dole count on." Noel nodded, impressed again by her quiet strength. He helped her mount behind him, her hands settling lightly at his waist. The horses' hooves kicked up dust as they rode down the winding trail toward. Town main street stretched before them, already busy with morning traffic. Wagons creaked past, and folks hurried along the wooden sidewalks. As Noel and Crease rode past, conversation died. People stopped to stare, some turning their backs deliberately. "Look who's got herself a white man now," a woman whispered loud. Enough to hear Crease sat straighter, chin lifted. Her dignity made the whispers seem small and mean. Noel guided the horse to the hitching post outside the mercantile, helping Crease down. The wooden steps creaked under their boots as they entered the store. The usual chatter. Inside fell silent. Mr. Peterson, the storekeeper, stood frozen behind his counter, rags suspended over a jar he'd been dusting. Other customers edged away, creating a clear path to the counter. "Morning," Noel said, his deep voice filling the quiet. He set their list on the counter. "Need these items." Peterson's eyes darted between Noel and Crease. We don't usually." Noel placed a stack of coins on the counter with a solid click. "Your store sign says, 'All welcome.' That true?" The storekeeper swallowed, then began gathering their supplies. Flour, coffee, sugar, salt, pork. Crease added a spool of thread and some buttons to their order, her movements careful and precise. The other customers watched, whispering behind their hands. As Peterson tallied their purchases, Crease spotted a bolt of blue calico. Her fingers brushed the fabric longingly before dropping away. Noel noticed and added 3 yards to their order. Ignoring her surprised look, they carried their packages out into the harsh sunlight. Deputy Walt Briggs lounged against a post, tobacco juice staining his chin. As they passed, he spat deliberately in the dust near Crease's feet. "Chains suited you better than that dress," he sneered. "Don't forget your place, girl." Noel's muscles tensed, his hand twitching toward his gun. But Crease's touch on his arm stopped him. Her grip was firm, grounding. "The Lord sees all hearts." "Clearly," she said quietly, "even yours, Deputy Briggs." They walked away, Noel's arm supporting Crease, though her steps never faltered. They stored their supplies in the saddlebags, then led the horse toward the white-painted church at the edge of town. A revival meeting was scheduled for the afternoon. A bell was already calling people to worship. Inside, the church was stuffy, despite open windows. Ladies fanned themselves with hymn books while children fidgeted in Sunday best. Noel and Crease sat in the back row, but their presence rippled through the congregation like a stone dropped in still water. Reverend Matthews, a slight man with kind eyes, began the service with prayer. As he spoke of God's love for all his children, his gaze settled meaningfully on Crease. After several hymns, he smiled at the congregation. "We're blessed today with a special guest," he announced. "Miss Johnson, I've heard tell you have a gift for sacred song. Would you share it with us?" Silence fell heavy as a winter blanket. Crease rose slowly, smoothing her skirt. Noel watched her walk to the front, her back straight as a pine tree. She turned to face the congregation, hands clasped before her. When she began to sing Amazing Grace, her voice filled every corner of the church. Clear as morning light, rich as river water, it carried years of pain and hope in every note. The hymn floated out the windows, drawing people from the street to peer inside. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Noel had heard the hymn countless times, but never like this. Crease's voice gave it new meaning, speaking of chains broken and spirits freed. He watched hardened faces soften, saw women dabbing at eyes with handkerchiefs. "I once was lost, but now I am found, was blind, but now I see." As the last note faded, silence held for a heartbeat. Then applause broke out, scattered at first, then spreading. Several people nodded respectfully to Crease as she returned to her seat. "Mrs. Peterson." The storekeeper's wife smiled warmly. The rest of the service passed in a gentle haze of prayer and song. When it ended, a few townsfolk stopped to thank Kreese for her singing. Each small kindness felt like a crack in a wall of prejudice. The sun was setting as they rode home, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Kreese's voice had opened something in the town's heart. Not acceptance yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Noel felt it too, a warmth in his chest he hadn't known he missed in the shadows between buildings. Sheriff Dole watched them ride away, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack nuts. He'd seen the way people responded to the woman singing, how they'd begun to look at her like a person instead of property. The sheriff's fingers curled around his gun belt. Everything he'd built here depended on people knowing their place. He couldn't let one freed woman's voice change that, especially not when that valuable river deed was at stake. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, catching dust motes that danced in the air. Kreese hummed softly as she swept the packed dirt floor with steady, rhythmic strokes. The crude broom, fashioned from prairie grass, whispered across the ground. Her movements were unhurried, peaceful, as if this simple task could make the rough cabin more of a home. Noel sat at the table, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife. His eyes kept drifting to Kreese as she worked, noting how she'd already brought order to his sparse living space. The tin plates gleamed on their shelf, his few books stood neatly arranged, and fresh wildflowers brightened the windowsill. "Coffee's ready," Kreese announced, lifting the pot from the cooking fire. Steam curled invitingly from the spout. She poured 2 cups, the rich aroma filling the cabin. "Much obliged," Noel said, accepting his cup. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange. Neither pulled away too quickly. Kreese settled across from him with her own coffee, breaking off a piece of yesterday's cornbread. "My mama always said breakfast tastes better with company," she said, offering him half. A rare smile touched Noel's scarred face. "Reckon your mama was right about that." Sunlight warmed the cabin as they shared their simple meal. Kreese told stories about her childhood in Tennessee, making Noel chuckle with tales of her mishaps learning to cook. His own laughter surprised him. It had been so long since genuine mirth had crossed his lips. The peaceful moment shattered at the crack of gunfire. 3 shots split the air in rapid succession, followed by the thunder of approaching hooves. Noel was on his feet instantly, reaching for his shotgun mounted above the door. "Stay inside," he ordered, but Kreese was already moving to the window. Her face set with determination, for riders approached the cabin, dust rising behind their horses. Noel recognized Deputy Briggs leading the group, their rifles held ready. He stepped onto the porch, shotgun balanced in his hands, deliberately blocking the doorway where Kreese stood. "That's far enough," Noel called out as the riders drew near. His voice carried across the yard, hard as iron. Briggs reined his horse to a stop, others falling in beside him. "Now, Boone, you know why we're here," he drawled, though his eyes were cold. "Sheriff says that woman's got no right to that river deed. Best hand her over, peaceful-like." "She's got every right to it," Noel replied. "Legal paper with her name on it says so." "Ain't natural, letting her kind own good water rights," another deputy spat. "Sheriff'll make it worth your while to step." Aside, Noel's finger settled near the shotgun's trigger. "I reckon you boys better ride out now, while you still can." Briggs's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Boone, siding with her against your own kind. Only mistake here is you thinking you can steal what's rightfully hers." Noel's voice remained steady, but his meaning was clear as a drawn blade. The deputies exchanged glances, measuring Noel's resolve. They knew his reputation, knew the violence in his past. The shotgun in his hands wasn't for show. "This ain't over," Briggs warned, wheeling his horse around. "Sheriff won't stand for this." We'll be back with more men. Then you better bring coffins too, Noel replied quietly. The riders spurred their horses, kicking up dust as they retreated. Noel watched until they disappeared beyond the rise, then turned to find Kreese trembling against the doorframe. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Now they'll come after you too. Noel set the shotgun aside and guided her back into the cabin. Been alone too long, he said. Forgot what it felt like to stand for something right. Kreese squared her shoulders, though her hands still shook. Well then, we best have a proper meal to keep up our strength. She moved to the cooking area with purpose, pulling out flour and yeast. My husband always said good bread could drive out fear. Noel watched as she mixed the ingredients, her movements sure despite her lingering tension. The familiar task seemed to steady her. Soon, the cabin filled with the comforting smell of rising dough. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Kreese shaped the bread into loaves while Noel cleaned his guns at the table, both of them working in comfortable silence. The approaching storm cast strange shadows through the window. Never thought I'd feel purpose again, Noel said suddenly, breaking the quiet. After the war, after all the killing, seemed easier to just exist alone. Kreese looked up from her baking, flour dusting her arms. The Lord works in mysterious ways, she said softly. Sometimes he sends us down hard paths to find what's right. Thunder rumbled in the distance as they shared supper, fresh bread, beans, and coffee. The bond between them had grown stronger through the day's trials, built on trust and shared. Courage. Rain began to fall as night settled in, pattering against the roof. Wind howled around the cabin's corners, but inside remained warm and snug. Kreese cleared the dishes while Noel took up position by the window, rifle across his knees. Lightning illuminated his watchful face in brief, stark flashes. Get some rest, he told Kreese. I'll keep first watch. She nodded, settling onto her pallet near the hearth. The storm's fury increased, rain lashing against the walls, but Noel remained vigilant. His silhouette at the window stood as a guardian, between Kreese and whatever threats the night might bring. Dawn broke over the frontier, revealing a transformed landscape. The night's fierce storm had left the earth sodden, with pools of water gleaming in every hollow. Mud clung thick to the ground, promising treacherous riding ahead. Still, as the sun climbed higher, Noel and Kreese prepared for their journey to her riverland. Weather's cleared enough, Noel said, tightening the cinch on his horse's saddle. Might be slow going, but we can make it. Kreese nodded, adjusting her worn shawl against the morning chill. I need to see it, she said softly. Need to know my. Henry's dream is still there. They mounted up carefully, horses picking their way through the muddy yard. The trail wound down from Noel's cabin through scrubby hills, bearing east toward the river valley. Their horses' hooves made sucking sounds. In the wet earth, forcing them to ride at a careful walk, Noel led the way, choosing the firmest ground. His broad shoulders were tense, eyes constantly scanning the countryside. Behind him, Kreese rode straight-backed, her face set with determination. The morning sun warmed their backs as they descended into greener country. After 2 hours of careful riding, they crested a rise overlooking the river valley. Kreese drew in a sharp breath. Below them stretched a sweep of rich bottomland, dark soil cut through by the gleaming ribbon of the river. Cottonwood trees lined the banks, their leaves shimmering silver in the breeze. There, Kreese pointed, her voice thick with emotion. See that lightning-struck oak? That's the corner marker Henry set. They rode down to the property line, where a weathered stake still stood firm in the ground. Nearby lay the fallen oak tree, its split trunk pointing toward the river like a finger. Kreese dismounted, her boots sinking slightly in the damp soil. She knelt and pressed her palm flat against the earth. Thank you, Lord, she whispered, head bowed. Thank you for keeping this piece of promise safe." Noel remained mounted, but his eyes swept the valuable land with knowing appreciation. Rich soil, reliable water, good grazing. It was the kind of spread men would kill for out here. He had seen enough range wars to know how blood could stain such precious ground. "Your husband chose well," he said finally. "This is fine land, worth fighting for." Cree stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "Henry said it would feed generations. Said our children's children would work this soil in freedom." Her voice caught. "He died believing that." "Men will kill over water rights," Noel warned quietly, "especially in dry years. The sheriff won't be the last to try taking it. Then, we trust in the Lord to sustain us," Kreese replied firmly. She walked to the river's edge, boots leaving deep prints in the mud. This land means more than just water and soil. It's hope made real. They rode the boundary line slowly, finding Henry's other markers still in place. Kreese spoke of her plans, where she would plant gardens, build the little schoolhouse, graze cattle. Noel listened, offering practical suggestions about fencing and water access. As they started the ride back to his cabin, Kreese turned in her saddle to face him. "You've seen much violence," she said. "But have you never wondered why God spared you through it all?" Noel was silent for a long moment, only the creak of leather and thud of hooves filling the air. "Stopped asking those questions," he finally replied. "Stopped believing there was purpose to it. Perhaps he preserved you for just such a time as this." Kreese pressed gently. "To stand beside those who need protection. To use your strength for justice instead of harm." Noel's scarred face tightened, but something flickered in his eyes. The rest of their ride passed in thoughtful quiet, each considering the day's revelations. They reached the cabin as evening painted the sky in deep purples and golds. While Kreese began preparing their supper, Noel hung a brass lantern from a hook near the door. Its warm light spilled across the wooden floor, creating a cozy circle in the gathering dusk. The cabin filled with savory smells as Kreese stirred a pot of stew. Over the cooking fire, Noel sat at the table, cleaning his revolver with practiced motions. The peaceful domestic scene felt strange, yet right, as if some missing piece had finally found its place. "Been thinking about what you said." Noel spoke suddenly. "About purpose." He paused, hands still moving over the gun's mechanisms. "Maybe there is reason I'm still here. Maybe this is where I'm meant to be." Kreese smiled softly, stirring the stew. "Tell me what you dream of when you let yourself dream." Noel was quiet. So long she thought he might not answer. "Cattle," he finally said. "Good breed stock, grazing peaceful. Building something that lasts instead of destroying." He looked up at her. "What about you? Beyond the school?" "A place where children can learn without fear," Kreese replied, her voice warm with conviction. "Where they can read their own names, write their own stories. Where they know they're free in body and mind both." She ladled stew into tin bowls. "It's not so different from your dream, building something that lasts." They sat together at the table, the lantern light catching gold highlights in Kreese's dark hair. The moment felt tender, wrapped in possibility. Noel found himself studying her face, noting how hope made her eyes bright despite all she had endured. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the peace. The bullet smashed through the window, sending glass tinkling across the floor. Noel lunged for the lantern, extinguishing it in one swift motion. Darkness flooded the cabin. "Get down," he ordered quietly, already moving to the window with his revolver drawn. Kreese pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding but hands steady. Silence stretched outside, heavy with threat. The warning shot had made its point. They were being watched, targeted. Noel's finger rested on the trigger, eyes straining to pierce the darkness beyond the broken window. I count at least 3 horses, he whispered. They're waiting to see if we run. Kreese's voice came soft but firm from the darkness. We won't run. The night pressed close around the cabin, thick and dangerous. Noel moved like a shadow, easing. The door opened without a sound. The wet earth caught the starlight, gleaming faintly. He crouched low, listening to the whispers of the dark. His boots sank into mud as he circled the cabin. Here and there, hoofprints cut deep into the sodden ground. 3 sets, maybe 4, leading in a wide arc around his home. The riders had taken their time, studying the cabin's weaknesses. Noel's jaw tightened as he traced their path with practice. Eyes dot back inside, Kreese waited by the cold hearth, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. What did you find? She whispered. They weren't just passing through, Noel said grimly. They were scouting, looking for ways in. He checked his revolver, the metal cool against his palm. We need help. Can't hold them off alone forever. Kreese nodded slowly. The preacher, she said. He warned us before. Maybe he'll know what to do. Dawn painted the sky in pale gold as they rode toward Preacher Josiah's cabin. The old man was already awake, tending his small garden. He straightened slowly at their approach, leaning on his hoe. Troubles found you, he said. It wasn't a question. They dismounted, and Kreese told him about the night's warning shot, the circling riders. Noel described the tracks he'd found. The preacher listened in silence, his weathered face grave dot inside his humble cabin. The old man poured them coffee in tin cups. Steam rose in the morning light, filtering through his window. The sheriff's gathered quite a following, he said. Men who'd sell their souls for water rights, but God's truth stands against their greed. What should we do? Kreese asked softly. Preacher? Josiah's eyes were kind but firm. Stand for truth, and God will send help. The town's not all corrupt. Some remember justice. He looked at Noel. Some remember what it means to protect the innocent. They rode back toward town, taking the long way to avoid the main streets. As they passed the schoolhouse, children's laughter drifted on the breeze. A group of young ones played in the yard, that joy untouched by the adult world's darkness. Kreese reined her horse to a stop, watching them. That's what I want, she said quietly. A place where children can laugh like that, where they can learn and grow strong no matter their color. She turned to Noel, her eyes bright with unshed tears. My land could give them that hope. Noel saw the depth of her dream then, saw how it was about more than just water rights or property. It was about building a future where freedom meant something real. They spent the afternoon checking their supplies, cleaning weapons, preparing for whatever might come. As dusk approached, they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. The cabin felt almost peaceful in the fading light. We should head back soon, Noel said, rising from the table. Don't want to ride these trails in full dark. They mounted up carefully, eyes scanning the deepening shadows. The trail wound through scrub oak and rocky outcrops, narrow enough that they had to ride single file. Noel led the way, his rifle across his saddle. The attack came swift and silent. Riders burst from behind the rocks, dark shapes against the twilight sky. Gunshots cracked the evening quiet. Noel's horse reared, nearly throwing him. He fired back, his rifle booming in the confined space. Kreese, run! He shouted, but more riders appeared behind them, cutting off escape. Noel fought like a man possessed. His rifle emptied, he drew his revolver, shooting with deadly accuracy. 2 deputies fell from their saddles, cursing. But there were too many. A rope whipped through the air, catching Kreese around the shoulders. She screamed as rough hands dragged her from her horse. Noel spurred toward her, but a rifle butt caught him across the temple. Pain exploded through his skull. He saw Kreese struggling as they bound her hands, saw tears streaming down her face. as they threw her across a saddle. Then another blow sent him tumbling from his horse into the mud. Boots kicked him as he tried to rise. Through blurring vision, he watched helplessly as they rode away with Kreese, her screams fading into the gathering night. The last thing he felt was rain starting to fall, cold drops mixing with the blood on his face. Then darkness took him, and he knew nothing more. The deputies left him there in the dirt, believing him dead or close enough to it. Noel lay unconscious. As night settled fully over the land, his body broken, his failure complete. Above him, stars emerged one by one, silent witnesses to the violence below. Dawn crept across the muddy trail. Pale light touching Noel's battered face, his eyes fluttered, open, squinting against the painful brightness. Every breath sent daggers through his ribs. He tried to move and groaned, tasting blood on his lips. The events of last night crashed back into his mind. Kreese, they'd taken Kreese. He rolled onto his side, clutching at the wet earth. His horse was gone, probably spooked by the gunfire. Noel's fingers found a rock, and he used it to lever himself up, fighting waves of dizziness. His head throbbed where the rifle butt had struck. The walk back to his shack felt endless. Each step was agony, but he forced himself forward, using trees for support when his legs threatened to give out. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist, making his eyes water. Finally, his cabin came into view. The door hung open, items scattered across the porch from the deputy's search. Inside, they'd ransacked everything. His few books lay torn on the floor, dishes shattered. His bedroll slashed, Noel stumbled to the water barrel, scooping handfuls to wash his face. Pink-tinged water dripped from his chin. In the bottom of a drawer, he found clean rags and wrapped his bleeding head. His hands shook as he tried to tie the knot. The emptiness of the cabin pressed in on him. No smell of coffee or bread. No quiet humming as Kreese worked. Just silence and the evidence of violence. His legs gave out then, and he slid down beside the cold hearth, the same hearth where Kreese had knelt to pray, where she'd sung hymns in her clear, strong voice. He could almost hear the echo of her songs. Something broke inside him. For the first time since he was a boy, Noel Boone fell to his knees in prayer. "Lord," he whispered hoarsely, "I ain't worthy to ask you anything. Been running from you too long." His shoulders shook, but Kreese, she believes. She sees your light even in this dark place. Don't let them break her spirit. Don't let them win. Tears mixed with blood on his cheeks. "I don't want revenge, Lord. Just give me strength to protect her, to stand for what's right like she does. Help me find her." Before his voice cracked, the morning light streamed through the window, warming his face. In his mind, he heard Kreese's voice singing that old hymn, "Amazing Grace." How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Noel opened his eyes. Something had shifted inside him, like a key turning in a rusty lock. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Moving carefully, he cleaned his wounds properly and changed into fresh clothes. Every movement hurt, but purpose drove him now. He found his spare revolver in its hiding place and checked the loads. His mare had returned, grazing in the back pasture. She nickered softly as he approached. "Good girl," he murmured, checking her for injuries. Finding none, he led her to the barn and began saddling her with slow, deliberate movements. The ride into town took twice as long as usual. Noel's ribs protested every step, but he kept his back straight. People stared as he passed, whispering behind their hands. He ignored them all, heading straight for the small church on the edge of town. Preacher Josiah was in his study, writing his Sunday sermon. He looked up sharply when Noel entered, taking in his bandaged head and bruised face. "They took her," Noel said simply. The old man's face grew grave. "I heard." The sheriff's men are bragging about it in the saloon. He stood slowly. There's more. Tomorrow at noon, he's planning what he calls a demonstration of justice. Going to burn her deed in the town square. Noel's hands clenched. Where are they keeping her? The old tannery, I believe. 2 deputies guard the door. The preacher studied him. You mean to go in alone? Got no choice. You have more allies than you think. Josiah moved to stand before him. I've been talking to folks. Some remember when the sheriff first came. How he drove out honest ranchers to claim their water rights. Others have seen Crease's kindness, heard her sing. Not everyone supports what he's doing. Hope flickered in Noel's chest. Can you rally them? I can try. Tomorrow, when he calls everyone to witness his justice, there might be some willing to stand against him. The preacher's eyes were steel. God's timing isn't always what we expect, but it's always perfect. Noel nodded slowly. I'll find Crease. Get her somewhere safe until then. Be careful, son. The sheriff's desperate. He knows his power's built on lies, and lies don't stand forever. Outside, Noel mounted carefully, adjusting his gun belt. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. He could feel eyes watching from windows, but he didn't care anymore. Let them look. Let them see what standing up to evil cost. His mare shifted beneath him, sensing his tension. Noel patted her neck, then turned her toward the edge of town where the old tannery stood. The building was weather-beaten, its windows dark. 2 armed men lounged by the door, just as the preacher had said. Hold on, Crease, he whispered, steel in his voice. I'm coming. He urged his horse into the cover of trees, beginning to plan. The sun continued its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Soon darkness would come, bringing with it his chance to make things right. The memory of Crease's hymn echoed in his mind again. I once was lost, but now I'm found. He touched his revolver, feeling its familiar weight. This time, he wasn't fighting out of hatred or revenge. This was about protecting something precious, something worth dying for. God's grace had found him at last, kneeling broken by his hearth. Now it was time to share that grace with others, even if it meant facing down the devil himself. Iron bars cast long shadows across the dirt floor of the jail cell. Crease sat on the rough wooden bench, her back straight despite the heavy chains binding her wrists. The cell smelled of dust and despair. But she refused to let it break her spirit. Through the small window, she could hear the deputies laughing in the front office. Their voices carried clearly in the stuffy afternoon air. It's going to be quite a show. Tomorrow, one said, his boots scraping across the floorboards. Sheriff says we'll make an example of that deed, burning. Show folks what happens when they challenge the natural order. Reckon that'll settle things proper, another replied. Once that paper burns, ain't nobody gonna question who owns them water rights. Crease closed her eyes, drawing in a slow breath. Her fingers traced the worn wooden beads of her mother's rosary, hidden in the folds of her skirt. Softly, barely above a whisper, she began to recite, Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. The words steadied her, just as they had during all the dark times before. She thought of her husband, how he died believing in that land, in the dream of building something lasting. The deed wasn't just paper, it was hope made real, miles away, at the edge of town where scrubland met mountains. Noel Boone rode his horse carefully along a narrow trail. His ribs still ached from the beating, but determination drove him forward. He'd heard tell of Henry, the Ute Scout, living in these hills. They'd crossed paths years ago, not always peacefully. But Henry was known as a man of honor. Noel found the Scouts' camp, tucked against a red rock wall. Henry sat cross-legged by a small fire, watching his approach with careful eyes. The scout's face bore the weathered lines of one who'd seen too much injustice, yet carried himself with quiet dignity. "Been a long time, Boone," Henry said, not rising. His voice was deep, measured. "What brings you to my fire?" Noel dismounted slowly, mindful of his injuries. "Need your help, Henry? There's a woman being held in town. Sheriff means to steal her land, same as he's done to others. Same as was done to your people." Henry's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "Why should Seed?" "I care about white man's quarrels." "She ain't white," Noel said quietly. "She's a freedwoman, got legal claim to river water rights. Sheriff can't stand seeing her own what he thinks should be his." That got Henry's attention. He gestured for Noel to sit, offering a tin cup of coffee. "Tell me more." Noel explained everything, finding Crease in chains, her dream of building a school, the sheriff's escalating violence. As he spoke, Henry studied the flames, his face unreadable. "I remember when settlers first came," Henry said finally, a day. "Spoke of law, of papers that gave them rights to land that was never theirs to take. Now they fight amongst themselves over those same papers." He looked up at Noel. "But a woman who dreams of teaching children, that is something worth protecting." Relief washed through Noel. "Then you'll help." Henry nodded once. "I will help. Not for you, not for papers, but for justice that has been too long denied." They spent the next hour gathering supplies, coils of rope, extra ammunition, blankets. Henry had 3 good horses, fleet-footed and sure in the dark. As they worked, he shared his knowledge of the town's hidden paths, the guards' routines, the shadows where men could move unseen. The sun was setting when they rode toward town, keeping to the cover of ravines and cottonwood groves. In the growing darkness, they could see torches being lit in the town square. Workers were stacking wood for what would clearly be a massive bonfire. "Sheriff means to make a spectacle," Henry observed quietly. "Draw a crowd to witness his power." Noel's jaw tightened. "Also means more eyes watching, more chances of something going wrong." They tied their horses in a sheltered gully and crept closer to town. The square was eerily lit by torch flames, shadows dancing across the false fronts of buildings. Deputies moved about, checking the woodpile, laughing amongst themselves. Then came the sound of chains. Noel's heart clenched as 2 deputies dragged Crease from the jail. She stumbled but didn't fall, keeping her head high despite the iron shackles. They forced her to stand near the woodpile while the sheriff emerged from his office, strutting like a rooster. "Let everyone see," he called out to the gathering crowd. "Let everyone witness what becomes of those who defy proper authority." From their hidden position, Noel could see Crease's face in the torchlight. Though tired and dirty from her captivity, her eyes blazed with defiance. She began to sing, her voice carrying clear and strong across the square. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." A deputy struck her, cutting off the hymn. Noel's hand went to his gun, but Henry's firm grip stopped him. "Not yet," the scout whispered. "Wait for darkness. Wait for the right moment." Noel forced himself to be still, though every fiber of his being yearned to charge forward. He watched as they chained Crease to a post near the woodpile, making sure she'd have a clear view when they burned her deed. Tomorrow. The crowd began to disperse as night truly fell. Deputies took up positions around the square, rifles ready. Crease remained bound to the post, head bowed but back straight, while the sheriff retired to the saloon to celebrate his coming triumph. In the deep shadows between buildings, Noel and Henry watched and waited. Noel's hand found the cross hanging from his neck, the one he'd ignored for so many years. He touched it now, drawing strength from its familiar shape. "Lord," he prayed silently, "give us guidance. Show us the path to set things right." Beside him, Henry loaded his rifle with practiced care. The scout's face was calm, but his eyes held the sharp focus of a hunter preparing for the kill. Together, they settled in to wait for full darkness, when they would make their move to free Crease and stop the sheriff's plan. The night deepened around them, stars appearing one by one above the false fronts and torch flames. Tomorrow would bring either justice or tragedy, but for now they watched and planned. While Crease kept her lonely vigil by the woodpile, Faith sustaining her through the long hours ahead. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as figures moved silently through the sleeping town. They gathered behind the church, where shadows still clung thick beneath the cottonwoods. Noel recognized familiar faces. The blacksmith who'd nodded respectfully at Crease in the store, the seamstress who'd offered her thread, the farmer whose children had smiled at her songs. Preacher Josiah stood in their midst, his white hair gleaming in the early light. Though his shoulders stooped with age, his voice carried steady authority. Friends, we gather because justice demands witness. The sheriff means to burn a legal deed today, to steal from a woman who's shown nothing but dignity and faith. Henry remained apart from the group, watching from beneath the brim of his hat. His presence made some townsfolk nervous, but none questioned it. They knew frontier justice sometimes required unusual alliances. "I've seen the deed myself," the preacher continued, producing a worn leather document case. "These are copies of the land office records proving Crease Johnson's legitimate claim. Her husband paid in full, signed proper, witness true." The blacksmith spoke up, his voice gruff with concern. "Sheriff's got 20 deputies. They won't care about papers when bullets start flying. That's why we need everyone's help," Noel said, stepping forward. His bruised face testified to the stakes they faced. "When the burning starts, we spread through the crowd. Show folks the truth. Make them see what's really happening." The seamstress clutched her shawl tighter. "Some won't want to see. Some prefer comfortable lies to hard truth. Then we make them look harder," Henry said quietly. All eyes turned to him. "Your sheriff builds power on fear. Fear of difference. Fear of change. But fear falls apart when good people stand together." The group nodded slowly. They spent the next hour planning positions, signals, how to move through the crowd. The preacher would speak first, challenging the sheriff's authority with law and scripture. Others would spread copies of the records, showing townsfolk the truth about Crease's claim. As the sun climbed higher, they dispersed in twos and threes, careful not to draw attention. Noel watched them go, touching the cross at his neck. "Lord," he whispered, "give us strength for what's coming." The day passed with agonizing slowness. Townsfolk began gathering in the square as afternoon waned, drawn by the sheriff's proclamations of justice being served. Deputies swaggered through the crowd, hands on gun belts, while children darted between adults' legs, treating it like a festival. Noel's heart clenched when they brought Crease out. Her dress was dirty from the jail cell, but she walked straight-backed, despite her chains. They forced her to stand beside the woodpile, where everyone could see her. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Sheriff Dole emerged from his office, Crease's deed held high above his head. His voice boomed across the square. "Good people of this town, we gather to witness law and order restored." He strutted before the crowd, playing to their prejudices. "No black woman can hold land here. It ain't natural, ain't right." Some cheered, but others shifted uneasily. Noel saw their planned allies moving through the crowd, whispering, showing the copied records. Doubt began spreading like ripples in a pond. The sheriff continued his speech, growing more animated. "This paper is an insult to every honest settler. Every man who built this town with his own hands." He waved the deed dramatically. "We'll burn it here. Make an example that land is mine by law and blood. Crease's voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through his words. The crowd fell silent, struck by her dignity, even in chains. She lifted her chin, dark eyes blazing. My husband died believing in that land. Died free, died holding legal title. You can burn paper, but you can't burn truth. The sheriff's face twisted with rage. He started toward her hand raised to strike, but Noel stepped out of the crowd. Placing himself between them, his tall frame cast a long shadow in the setting sun. "Don't you touch her," he said. Voice low, but carrying across the sudden hush. The sheriff's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "Seize him," he barked to his deputies. "Arrest this man." Deputies moved forward, drawing weapons. The crowd began backing away, sensing violence about to erupt. But before anyone could reach Noel, a rifle crack split the air. Henry's warning. Shot kicked up dust at the sheriff's feet. The scout emerged from shadow, rifle trained steady. "Next one won't miss," he called out calmly. Chaos erupted in the square. People scattered, screaming. Deputies spun in confusion, unsure where to aim. The sheriff bellowed orders, face purple with fury. Through it all, Preacher Josiah's voice rose like thunder. "Witnesses, see how your sheriff abuses power. See how he breaks law to serve his greed." More voices joined in. The blacksmith, the seamstress, the farmer. People who'd stayed quiet too long, finding courage in numbers. They waved the copied records, shouting for justice. The sheriff's control over the crowd was slipping. He could see it in their faces. Fear giving way to anger. Doubt blooming into defiance. His carefully built authority crumbling like sand. In the midst of the chaos, Noel stood unmoved beside Crease. Their eyes met briefly, exchanging silent strength. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The square erupted into shouts and motion as sunset painted the sky blood red above the town. Chaos erupted in the town square like a powder keg igniting. Deputies lunged toward Noel, their boots kicking up dust in the torchlit darkness. But before they could reach him, townspeople surged forward. Marcus the blacksmith planted his massive frame between two lawmen and Noel. Sarah from the mercantile grabbed one deputy's arm, crying out, "Stop this madness." The preacher's voice boomed across the square, carrying the weight of moral authority. The law must be upheld. This deed is legal and binding before God and man. He held his Bible high, the leather cover catching the orange glow of the torches. "Sheriff." Dole snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "Get out of the way, you old fool." He shoved the preacher aside, making him stumble against the woodpile. Two deputies broke through the crowd, swinging fists at Noel. He ducked the first blow, years of ranch work having honed his reflexes. The second deputy caught him with a glancing hit to the ribs, but Noel returned with a solid punch that sent the man sprawling. "The law's with us." Someone shouted from the crowd, "Let Miss Crease keep her land." More voices joined in, the tide of public opinion turning like a river changing course. Crease stood tall despite her chains, her quiet dignity moving hearts that had long been hardened by prejudice. Henry's rifle cracked again from the rooftop, the shout whistling over heads to keep the deputies at bay. "Next one won't be a warning," he called down, his voice steady and sure. A deputy rushed at Noel with a knife, blade glinting in the firelight. Noel caught his wrist, twisted hard, and sent the weapon clattering to the dirt. The man howled in pain as Noel shoved him away. The sheriff, seeing his control slipping, stormed toward Crease. His face was a mask of fury as he raised his hand and struck her hard across the face. The crack of the blow echoed through the square like a gunshot. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by angry shouts. "You yellow coward!" Marcus roared. Sarah screamed, "How dare you strike a lady?" The sight of Kreese staggering from the blow, blood trickling from her lip, broke something loose in the town's conscience. Men who had stood silent for years now stepped forward, pushing deputies back. Women who had turned away from Kreese now rushed to help her. Noel's vision went red with rage. But Kreese's teachings of mercy stayed his hand. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, tackling the sheriff before he could strike again. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust. The sheriff clawed for his gun, but Noel pinned his arm. They grappled in the dirt, the larger man's strength against the sheriff's desperate fury. Dole's fingers scratched at Noel's face, finding the old scars, but Noel held firm. "Do it," the sheriff spat. "Kill me, you stupid ranch hand. Prove you're the animal they say you are." Noel's fingers tightened around the sheriff's throat. 1. Squeeze would end it all. But Kreese's voice cut through his rage. "Noel, show him true justice." The words reached something deep in his soul. Noel's grip loosened, though he kept the sheriff pinned. "No," he growled. "You'll face a proper trial. Answer for every law you've broken." Around them, deputies began throwing down their guns, backing away from the angry crowd. These weren't hardened criminals, just local men who had followed the wrong leader too long. They saw the truth now, written in their sheriff's cruelty and Kreese's courage. Henry scrambled down. From his perch, rifle still ready. He saw the sheriff reaching for the deed, meaning to throw it in the fire. With lightning quickness, the Ute scout snatched the paper away, holding it high. "This belongs to the lady," he announced, his voice carrying authority earned through years of wisdom. The preacher stepped forward, straightening his coat. "Let's do this proper," he said. "Marcus, John, help Mr. Boone secure the sheriff. Sarah, fetch Judge Wilson. It's time this valley had a reckoning with truth." As 2 strong men took hold of the sheriff, Noel rose slowly to his feet. His knuckles were bloody, but his conscience was clean. He had chosen justice over vengeance, law over violence. The crowd's anger transformed into something else: relief, hope, even joy. Cheers broke out as Henry handed the deed back to Kreese. Someone found the key to her chains, and the iron shackles fell away with a final clank. "Miss Kreese." Voices called out, "We're sorry, Miss Kreese." Others added their support. "You'll always have a place here. Let us help you build that school." Kreese stood in the center of it all, touching her bruised cheek, but standing straight. Tears shone in her eyes, not from pain, but from the sight of a community finally choosing to do right. The sheriff was led away, his badges and guns removed. Deputies who had thrown down their weapons were allowed to leave, their shame punishment enough for now. The woodpile, meant for burning truth, was scattered by eager hands and carried away to warm, honest homes instead. Through it all, Noel stayed. Close to Kreese, his solid presence a shield against any lingering threat. The preacher approached them, his old eyes twinkling with triumph and tears. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Sometimes it takes a brave woman and a quiet man to wake a town's sleeping conscience." The torchlight slowly dimmed as the night deepened, but something new had been kindled in the town square, something that would burn brighter than any flame. The people of the valley had finally chosen to stand for what was right. Their courage awakened by one woman's unwavering dignity and one man's choice of mercy over revenge. The townsfolk bound Sheriff Dole's hands with his own shackles, i.e., the iron clicking shut with finality. Marcus and John marched him toward the jailhouse, followed by a guard of determined citizens. The sheriff's shoulders slumped, his power broken at last. Preacher Ward stood on the mercantile steps, his voice carrying across the square. "Today marks a new beginning for our valley. From this day forward, the law will serve all people fairly, regardless of their color or station. God's justice knows no boundaries. Noelle gently took Chris's arm, leading her away from the dispersing crowd. Her deed was folded carefully in her pocket, safe at last. They mounted their horses, her mare following his stallion along the familiar trail home. The sky lightened as they rode, pink and gold streaks chasing away the darkness. Back at the cabin, they practically fell from their saddles, bone-weary but alive. Noelle built up the fire while Chris sank into a chair beside the hearth. The flames cast warm light across their faces, highlighting fresh bruises and tired eyes. "You saved my life," Chris said softly, touching the deed in her pocket. "Not just from chains, but from losing hope entirely. I was starting to believe justice would never come." Noelle shook his head, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved me too. I was dead inside, living without faith or purpose. You showed me what real courage looks like." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then began speaking of tomorrow. Chris described where she'd build the schoolhouse on her riverland, while Noelle talked about good grazing spots for cattle. Their dreams intertwined naturally, like two streams joining to form a stronger river. "We could make something good here," Noelle said, hope clear in his voice. "Something that matters." Chris smiled, reaching for his hand. "With faith and hard work, we surely can." Weeks passed like water flowing downstream, each day bringing new life to the riverland. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the half-built cabin, where Noelle had carefully laid each log. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of fresh bread on the breeze. Near the riverbank, Chris sat on a fallen log surrounded by children from town. Their eager faces turned toward her as she taught them amazing grace. Her clear voice carried across the water, joined by small voices learning the melody. Some mothers watched from nearby, their attitudes softened by time and truth. Noah worked steady at the fence line, driving posts deep into fertile soil. Every so often, he paused, hammer in hand, to watch Chris with the children. Pride warmed his chest at how naturally she drew them in, black and white together, their differences forgotten in song. Preacher Ward arrived on his old mare, his Bible tucked under one arm. He walked the property slowly, sprinkling water and offering prayers of blessing over the land and cabin. Henry, the Ute scout, stood respectfully nearby, his own silent prayers joining the preacher's words as evening painted the sky in amber and rose. Noelle and Chris walked together along the riverbank. Their joined hands swung gently between them, while golden light danced on the water's surface. Their reflection rippled in the current. Two figures merged as one. Chris stopped at the water's edge, her voice soft with wonder. "This is what freedom feels like." Noelle's large hand tightened around hers, gentle despite its strength. "And this is what family feels like." They stood together, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky blazed with colors of promise, painting tomorrow in shades of hope. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.